Is joining us from New York City tonight. Mr. Ognibene, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
So you are, technically speaking, running for lieutenant governor, but we're not seeing a whole lot of you. So what is it exactly that you are doing as a candidate?
Well, I tell you what, I've had a great experience. Obviously, I travel around the city to as many meetings as I could get to. I've been upstate. I don't go up past Albany. That's Carl's territory. But I go to many of the meetings upstate, particularly the Tea Party meetings, and I'm the guest speaker. So I've had a great time going around talking to New Yorkers around the state, talking to New Yorkers in the city, talking to the constituents that remember me as a city councilman for 10 years and minority leader, as a candidate for mayor in 2005. And they're very excited about Carl's candidacy, particularly in the Republican Party. They think Carl represents the true interests of the Republican Party in this state. And I think people are looking for some changes. They want somebody who's an outsider, who's going to come in, who has real experience in economic growth and development. We anticipate a great race against Andrew Cuomo. I'm not trying to look past the primary, but we feel very confident that the people in the state are going to select Carl.
Right. I was going to say you're jumping ahead of yourself just a little bit there, because I think that Tuesday is the first contest in the primary. But let me ask you: you are a lifelong New Yorker, are you not? You've been in Queens all your life.
I've been a New Yorker all my life. Lived in Manhattan before I went into military service, and then when I came out of the service, I married, and my wife and I settled in Queens County. The only time I've ever lived out of New York was the 3 years that I was in military service.
Okay,
so I'm truly a lifelong New Yorker.
Okay, so as a lifelong New Yorker, a downstate resident, you know, Mr. Palladino recently said some things that I think really rubbed New York City residents wrong. I mean, he said he liked Staten Island and he liked Queens because he thought they were most like upstate. But as for Brooklyn and the Bronx, you know, you can have them. I mean, what do you say to that sort of
I don't
thing?
know. I think the reference that he was making primarily was in the primary, where those two areas, Queens and Staten Island, have a lot of Republicans in it. I don't think that he's anti the other boroughs. I think he's just pointing out that it's tough for somebody like myself and Carl to run in those areas. We've got a tough job convincing the people in those areas that we want to see new jobs in New York State, economic growth, and the kinds of things that I think that all New Yorkers want. So Carl just has a flair about him and a great way of expressing himself. But I think deep down inside what he meant was that certainly Queens and Staten Island have a little more of a conservative population.
So is that going to be enough, though, to carry the two of you over the finish line? Because, you know, polls at this point are indicating, at least public polls are indicating, that Rick Lazio and his running mate, an upstater, Greg Edwards, are ahead by at least a good 12 percentage points.
Well, I tell you, I never paid much attention to the polls, and I really don't. And I think that the core Republican voters, when they get a chance, and of course Carl's coming out with a heavy campaign on television, and we're doing a lot downstate also through mailings and email. And I think in the last week you're going to see that people are going to really start to digest his message, and you'll see a substantial change if you take a poll right before the election. But the only poll that we're interested in is the one that comes out next Tuesday night around 10:30, and then we'll know. But I think that we're very confident that we're going to carry this state, and that we're going to carry the banner of the Republican Party.
That's what you think, 10:30? Because actually the polls close at 9. That would be awfully early. You think that this race is going to get called that early?
Yes, I do. You know, I have experience in these things. We know when I was a city councilman, we knew certain areas in my district how the vote would go. And we picked certain EDs, and we could tell by the way the vote was going in those EDs what the anticipated result would be. So I think by 10:30 we're going to have a pretty good sense of where this election is going.
Okay, so you are running with Carl Palladino also on his independent taxpayers line, it's called. This
yes, that's
third-party
absolutely
line.
Correct.
If
right.
you do not win, and he's been back and forth on this a little bit, so I'm curious where you are. If you do not win, will you remain on that line with him, or without him, going forward into the general election?
Well, I tell you what, that's an issue that I haven't even looked at, because we fully anticipate that we're going to win. I think the only person that should be concerned about where they're going would be Mr. Lazio, because after we defeat him, he has to make a decision about the Conservative Party line.
Well, but you actually are you not allied with or you were at one point with the Conservative Party Chairman Mike Long?
Oh, I have no, listen, they made a decision. One of the great leaders in this state is Mike Long, and I understand that, but I think the question of what do you do if they lose the Republican primary is a question that's more appropriately asked of Mr. Lazio. We fully anticipate winning.
But Mr. Ognibene, you and Carl Palladino, assuming that you do win the primary, could then go on to spell the death of the Conservative Party, and you're allied with Mike Long.
Well, we don't anticipate that. We think that Mr. Lazio will rethink his position.
And do what exactly? Get off the Conservative line?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think he'll find a way to decline.
What about, tell me more about what it is that you're doing, because you actually are not campaigning very frequently with Carl Palladino, and you're not in touch with him?
I think that Carl has been concentrating his efforts in the upstate area. What they do is the campaign gives me appearances below Albany and in Queens County, Staten Island, Long Island, Manhattan. So I've been doing a lot of meetings at local Republican clubs, reaching out to my core constituency. So I haven't been doing a lot of what you might call high-profile campaigning, but I have been very active campaigning.
You know, what do you say about things that happened? For example, the New York Times comes out, and I know that it's viewed as sort of a liberal bastion and perhaps good that he did not back Carl Palladino, a badge of honor, if you will, but the paper said it would be a national embarrassment if Carl Palladino ended up being the standard bearer for the GOP. What's your thought on that?
I have no idea. I've never really believed wholeheartedly in the New York Times. They like to think that they're an opinion maker. I think that they're just afraid of Carl Palladino and the fact that he'll make real changes in the state. Ultimately, the only people that I rely on are the voters of the state of New York, not the New York Times.
But you don't think that the fear actually is more that he is perceived as a loose cannon and would say things like, for example, that Erie County Executive Chris Collins did not actually have to apologize for likening Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver to the Antichrist?
Well, you know, I've heard so much. People have said that on the left wing and on the extreme right wing, and I think we got to get away from the rhetoric. The New York Times has an interest in painting Carl a certain way because they're fearful that he's going to present a really aggressive campaign against somebody like an Andrew Cuomo, who has a lot of problems historically, especially his leadership over at Housing and Urban Development, where his policies really destroyed the economic foundation of this country through his ridiculous mortgage and lending policies. So I think when Carl starts to begin to attack those, they're going to be deeply concerned. And so the New York Times is trying to destroy him now because they want the easier candidate in Rick Lazio. They know Carl, with the money and the resources that he has, are going to present a much more difficult candidate for Mr. Cuomo in the general election. Is that so? Are you actually talking at this point about general election strategy beyond next Tuesday for the Palladino-Ognibene ticket? Well, we've had some private meetings about that. Naturally, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We are concentrating right now on the primary and reaching out to core Republican voters and to the Republican constituency in general. We realize that that's a hurdle that we have to overcome, but we feel very confident about it. And Mr. Ognibene, where will you be on primary night? I'll be with a group of my friends. I've been invited. I spoke to the upstate people today. They offered, of course, to fly me up to their primary night gala up in upstate New York, but I'm going to spend it downstate. As you know, I'm president of the Middle Village Republican Club, and I have a great deal of supporters downstate, and we're going to get together and have a little gathering down here right in Queens County. Well, we will know where to find you then, and I appreciate you coming in to talk to us this evening. Thanks very much, Tom Ognibene. My pleasure. Thanks, Liz.